Hello everybody and welcome to this Tyde Talk of Dead by Daylight's Dark Times Part 2. Recently we covered the base game and a lot of various changes from current mechanics to the previous versions. Today we'll begin the journey with the various changes through the Dark Times before the effort was made to bring Dead by Daylight back into the light. With the game in such a rough state, it only took 15 days to make the first major balance patch. Before we begin, this video is sponsored by Loot Crate. Loot Crate is a monthly service delivering to you a box of goodies to your door each month with a specific theme of your choice. The loot box I received was March 2019 Cosmic Pack, which came with a 3D Captain Marvel comic stand, Alien Facehugger Face Towel, Lost in Space Jupiter 2 notebook, Overwatch Primal Rage t-shirt, and a Cosmic pin. You could pick up a Loot Crate by going to lootcrate.com/TydeTime or follow the link in the description down below. Use promo code TydeTime to snag yourself a 10% discount. Remember that my name is spelt with 2 Y's, there are no I's in my name. Snag yourself or a loved one a Loot Crate today. You'll be able to choose a theme that suits your personal tastes and choose your t-shirt size to make sure it fits you and all your personal needs. And the rats even get to play in the box afterwards. It's a win-win for all of us. Patch 1.0.2 began to fix a ton of issues that came with the release of the game. Several of the godlike perks such as Sprint Burst and Will Make It were slightly nerfed to prevent survivors from abusing broken mechanics. Though this was the beginning of the game and everyone was still on the grind to unlock teachable perks. If you haven't already checked out the previous Tyde Talk on Sprint Burst, you can look at that as an example to just how powerful it was. Unlike today, you couldn't expect survivors to already have all the most powerful perks. This is why the patch focused on 2 specific perks. Meg was a survivor who could easily obtain Sprint Burst, and Claudette could gain Self-Care, which gained a massive benefit from Will Make It. Will Make It in general was also just a powerful perk, and it was already on every survivor, but it really enhanced the effects of Self-Care, making Claudette a second powerful choice. During this time in Dead by Daylight, survivors did not start with their unique perks at level 1, and were only guaranteed to get a single level of each perk at levels 5, 10, and 15. Due to this, you would be safe to assume a survivor had their unique perks equipped. Jakes were going to Sabotage, Meg was going to Sprint Burst, and Claudette was going to Self-Care, while Dwight was just going to be Dwight. He was pretty useless at the time, and that's very unfortunate. What this meant is that we didn't experience too many combination of perks being used together to show what they could really accomplish. Instead, it was just Sprint Burst by itself, or Will Make It, which was not a teachable, so that could go on any survivor, hence why Claudette's Self-Care could be boosted with that, and that's why it was targeted. There were likely to be a few players capable of getting enough blood points in such a short amount of time, but another thing to keep in mind is that the blood webs during this time were far more expensive. It took a lot more to level up, and this would be the reason that specific perks were being targeted. Megs just got their Sprint Burst early, and Claudette's were able to learn Will Make It without a teachable, and those were the 2 core problems at the time. The community was only able to see a fraction of potential of all the perks you could combine. With that, the developers were just made aware of Untouchable Meg with Sprint Burst and the insane 4-second self-heal ability from Claudette. In order to fix this, Sprint Burst's cooldown was doubled, and Will Make It only affects healing others, which means Self-Care could no longer gain the benefit. Of course, perks weren't the only issues hitting the game hard. Trolling became a more common thing among the community when players began to realize that they had an advantage as survivor, and they were sure to grief the killer when they could. Patch 1.0.2 focused on eliminating several of these issues as fast as possible. It was very common for survivors to hide in large maps for what seemed like an eternity, be it to gather additional blood points, annoy the killer till they quit, or simply just too scared to move. Regardless of the reason, it was a massive problem, as the killers struggled to handle these types of situations. This is when the AFK crow was introduced, giving notifications of the survivor's location if they hid in a locker for too long or remained in a concealed area without moving. Another community issue that was growing at an alarming rate was disconnections. During this time, there was no penalties for disconnecting when you wanted to screw the opponent out of blood points. Additionally, you couldn't be banned since the banning system did not exist to catch you disconnecting through an algorithm. Even a basic report feature was not available. Instead, you had to go out of your way onto the website and do a convoluted method of sending a support ticket in to get answered, which took several months to get a response. Developers began to fix smaller issues to make this slightly more tolerable by adding a penalty to pips when quitting out of a match and granting the killer additional points for a survivor rage quitting. It was obvious that killers were struggling, since majority of them were the ones making the complaints. Their perks were not only underwhelming, but at times less helpful than they were meant to be. Spies from the Shadows would be one of those perks, as the crows the killer scared off would proc the effect. Now the perk was updated with a wonderful quality of life, preventing the crows from alerting the killer if the killer themselves scared them off. Hackers and bots were also a glaring issue, with several players hacking in unlimited blood points into their account, which allowed them to unlock all perks and max their characters immediately. The common tactic would be to alter the game files, which would set your account to level 1 but provide you with billions of blood points when you log in. This is why we have a 1 million blood point limit in today's game. The fix back then was relatively simple for the developers. If there was a maximum cap of blood points for any account, then even if one were to hack in their blood points, they would only be able to start from level 1 and spend the maximum capped amount. Patch 1.0.2c would introduce the cap at 500,000 blood points. In today's standard, 1 million would only get you to roughly level 35, and back then, the blood webs were far more expensive, meaning you really couldn't get that far by hacking the game anymore. This patch change alone was a good step forward in the game's health. The developers were committed to showing that they wanted to improve the game. However, the developers were more reactive than proactive when it came to balancing the game. This would later prove to give Dead by Daylight its bad reputation in balance, as players began to pick this game apart over the next few years. The developers would host a dev stream after the patch's release to talk about all the changes and statistics for the game. They threatened bans to the hackers and would issue the bans out if they caught any of the players cheating, and they would send the bans out in mass waves, which we will experience further down the line. Statistics for the time would go to foreshadow the massive issues with the game, as Meg was the most popular character at the time, being played at a 33% rate, with Dwight being the lowest at 19%. With only 4 characters to be played, Dwight would prove to be the most worthless and become the meme of the game. With these stats in hand, developers would not foresee the flaw in their design of teachable perks. It was not originally conceived that the players would play with every teachable perk unlocked. In fact, the developers never thought the game would take off as fast and as well as it did. Over the time of developing the game, there were decisions made for the game that cannot be undone, that make it difficult for the developers to make the changes necessary to seek out the balance the players want. The list continues to grow, with map design being the next issue. They released statistics that recorded how well survivors were doing on specific maps. During this time, Shelter Woods was known among the community as the worst map for survivors, as it had little to no pallets in the map whatsoever. The only guaranteed pallet was in the Killer Shack. The stats would go to confirm this, as it was the most lethal map. In today's standard, if you were to play on Shelter Woods, you would notice there are a healthy amount of pallets placed all over in between rocks and jungle gyms. However, other maps would have record survival rates due to their extreme placement of pallets, reaching up to 30 pallets in a map. Azerov's resting place would be known to have several iterations that would be detrimental for killers, especially Blood Lodge. This map would go on to be known as Pallet City, as there were double pallets every few feet for the survivors to run between. It was an endless sea of defense, and the survivors were safe at all times. Although that would not stop behavior from pressing onward under the watchful eye of their publisher, Starbreeze. They would unfortunately not have the creative freedom to make the changes they wanted, and ultimately they had to appease the publisher. This would help contribute to the dark times, as we would eventually see Dead by Daylight continue to dip further down than it ever has. The divide between survivor mains and killer mains of the Dead by Daylight community only grew worse with time. These patches served as a healthy stepping stone for the game, but the community was heavily torn on what balance was meant to be. Survivors would go on to defend infinite loops as they deemed it as a necessary defense, while the killers would argue that they have little to no say in how the game plays out. This would lead us to the civil war of killers versus survivors, as behavior made attempts to appease both sides and assure players were having fun from both perspectives. It would be this divided feedback that would lead us deeper into the dark times. We'll explore more of this emotional roller coaster in the next Tyde Talk. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and as always, good game.